Please scare me at all for what I'm about to do. If it was my last day on earth, if it was my last day, if it was my last day on earth, if it was my last day, if I close my eyes and the sun don't shine, will I be okay? If it was my last day on earth, if it was my last day. If it was my last day on earth, I wouldn't be in church. I'm sorry, God, but it's my last day in this universe. I need to see birds and buzzing bees, green grass, evergreen trees, not people who have been mean to me. And why would I waste my time? All my favorite people need teary-eyed goodbyes. Talk, laugh, hug, and give a bunch of hard high fives. I did my best, y'all. I gave this thing a good try. If it was my last day on earth, if it was my last day, if it was my last day on earth, if it was my last day, if I close my eyes and the sun don't rise, will I be okay? If it was my last day on earth, if it was my last day. But you weren't expecting that. So there's this guy, his name is John, and he went to the doctor. And when he gets home, he looks terrible. His wife tells his wife that the doctor said that he is going to die before the end of the night. She hugs him, and they cry a little, and Becky, his wife, suggests that they go to bed early to make love one more time. They make love until Becky falls asleep, but John is frightened to sleep because it is his last night on earth. He lies there in the dark while Becky snores. John whispers in his wife's ear, "Becky, please, just one more time." But Becky keeps snoring. John looks at his watch and he leans over to his wife and he shakes her and he says, "Please, Becky, just once more for old time's sake." And Becky simply looks at him and says, "John, how can you be so selfish? I have to get up in the morning." All of us are going to die someday. And most of us will have loved ones who die from disease or old age before we do. In fact, many of us today are watching someone that we love die, and some of us are dying. Of course, we're all dying from the moment that we're born, and even when physicians tell us we have 3 to 6 months to live, we're not bread or milk. We don't have an expiration date stamped on us. So unlike John, we don't know the exact moment that we are going to die. But if you are told that you have an incurable, inoperable, terminal condition, and it is time to get your affairs in order, it's pretty solid indication that you're dying. There was a time when death and dying were woven more intimately into our daily lives. Dying was a community event, an experience. It wasn't just a medical event. People died at home, not isolated in hospitals. Families typically lived in the same town, and sometimes several generations lived in the same house, which meant that even children were exposed to the dying experience. It wasn't a secret. It wasn't something to fear or hide. It was just a part of life. Death and dying have become more of a mystery. We don't really know what to expect, and oftentimes movies certainly don't help that. They don't portray death as accurately as it is. And this not knowing creates fear. And that fear causes us to avoid having conversations about death and dying, which ultimately leads to all sorts of problems, including spiritual and emotional and intellectual and physical suffering for the person dying and for those that care for them. Before becoming a chaplain, I too was afraid of death. I didn't want to think about my own death. I didn't want to acknowledge that my parents were one day going to die. Honestly, I didn't even like watching movies that had anything to do with death and dying. I never would have imagined that I would be journeying with people as they approached the end of their life and witnessing as they took their last breath. Watching my mother die in the hospital was the worst thing that I've ever experienced. She died of kidney failure and congestive heart failure during the pandemic, which meant that the best hospitals in Florida were full, and there was either no patient visitation or very limited patient visitation. I thought I could get her moved from the little podunk hospital down in Port Charlotte, I'm not a big fan of, to my beloved, world-renowned Tampa General Hospital because I had worked there for so many years, but there were no available beds, so she couldn't be moved. She was in excruciating pain the last week of her life. She would call from her hospital room and she would beg to come home. And she would curse, yelling words that I had never heard my mother say before. Her pain and suffering was unbearable. We had no idea that death was imminent. The physicians continued to work to cure her. They told us that her pain was only due to a bowel blockage, and they were educating us on home dialysis when she was discharged from the hospital. She even had a procedure that was scheduled the day after she died. My mother did not have a good experience of dying. The actual event, the death, was not as bad as it could have been. My brother refused, he was there that night, and he refused to leave her room overnight, even though the hospital staff told him that he couldn't stay. During the pandemic, you weren't allowed to spend the night in the hospital. My brother is a U.S. Marine, and he fought in Kosovo. He's also a country boy and very much a mama's boy, so he was not leaving that hospital room. He knew that she was getting close to the end of her life. The next morning, it was about like 3, maybe 4 in the morning, he called and he said that we needed to come up to the hospital. So my little brother and my dad and I joined my older brother in the ICU, where my mom lay unresponsive, morphine flowing through her, finally providing her with comfort. At one point, I crawled into her bed and I laid beside her, softly crying. I held her hand and I rubbed it against my cheek and over my messy hair that she always said I needed to straighten or at least brush. The ICU was sterile. It was white and cold and unfamiliar. And she had numerous lines and tubes attached to her. And we circled her with our love. And we were in shock and disbelief of what was happening. And we were there, though, when she took her last breath. We were lucky that we were able to be with her in that sacred moment. During the pandemic, thousands and thousands of people died without any family or friends present. Courageous nurses and chaplains and medical staff in full head-to-toe PPE held iPads up for folks so their loved ones could say goodbye to them over video chat. It was awful. Thankfully, We are no longer having to deal with that part of the pandemic, and I pray that we learn from our experience so we don't have to endure it again. But what does remain, which I kind of was hoping would have changed after the pandemic, is our culture's aversion to learning about death and dying. The death and dying experience. People are in denial, maybe thinking that maybe if we avoid talking about death, then we can avoid death. Last time I checked, we were all mortal, so that's not really how it works. And if by chance a conversation about death and dying takes place, it is often grounded in fear and worry and dread and confusion and anticipatory grief. When I tell people that I'm a hospital chaplain, a hospice chaplain, was a hospital chaplain, now hospice chaplain, I like it a lot better. I usually get one of two responses. The most common is, oh, that must be really hard. How do you do that? They're honestly very sad when they hear I'm a hospice chaplain. Or I get, that's amazing. Your work is so important. They are so lucky to have you. First of all, I'm the lucky one. I am the lucky one. I don't have enough time to tell y'all how blessed I am to do this work, how fortunate I feel to do work that I love, and how honored I am that people trust me to walk with them in these sacred moments. And second of all, yes, it is extremely heartbreaking, but the joy far outweighs the ouchiness, especially as a hospice chaplain. Dying can actually be a positive experience, and seeking care through hospice is one way to make sure that that happens. Contrary to what many people think, hospice isn't just for people who have a few days to live, nor does it signify that a patient or the patient's family is giving up. In fact, according to the American Academy of Family Physicians, hospice care can actually increase life expectancy. Those with pancreatic cancer gained an average of 3 weeks, those with lung cancer 6 weeks, and those with congestive heart failure gained 3 months. This additional time is a gift we can use to spend with our friends and our family. We can more deeply embrace our spirituality, heal misunderstandings and hurts, and do any forgiveness or reconciliation work that may bring about a greater peace. While hospice care does not treat an illness, it manages pain and other symptoms. So it focuses on the comfort and the dignity and the quality of life of the person who is dying. Hospice care is as much about how you want to live as it is about how you want to die. It is an approach that involves multiple disciplines. So there's physicians, nurses, aides, social workers, chaplains, volunteers, so many volunteers, and bereavement specialists. They all provide comprehensive care for our patients nearing the end of life. So patients must be in the terminal phase of an illness with a life expectancy of 6 months or less to qualify for hospice. Though it is not unusual to receive recertification if they live longer. In my time at hospice, I have seen several patients who have been on service for a year or more, and some patients actually get off of service. They don't even stay on hospice. They get off of service and then come back later, when they're actually a little more terminal. Hospice care is excellent for patients in progressive stages of these non-curable diseases, the very weak and also the extremely elder. One of the advantages of hospice is that in most cases, physicians and medical staff and chaplains will go into the patient's home, so they don't have to worry about driving all over the place. Another advantage is that all these folks that are helping, the physicians and the nurses and the chaplains, we're all on one team, and we communicate with one another weekly about the patient's goals. We evaluate the patient's goals, not our goals, the patient's goals. And we discuss what interventions are needed that we can provide. Caregivers can also greatly benefit from hospice because we provide comfort and support, guidance, and grief counseling to these families more so than you would get in a traditional medical setting. Many hospice organizations, including the one that I work for, Chapters Health, offer 24-hour on-call care and support for patients and their families every day of the week. Hospice care is as much about living as it is dying. And dying is an experience that many people fear. Some patients fight death until the end. Others accept the finality as part of the life process. When to stay fixed on physically healing and when to shift to acceptance of death remain daunting questions for each person to consider. As I mentioned, often instead of thinking about death, folks avoid the topic. Many think there's plenty of time. I'll think about this tomorrow. Although we realize that logically death will come, most people act like dying must certainly be about everyone else, not me. So I've learned to be delicate in my approach when talking to patients who are not quite able to accept that they are dying. For some reason, just the word hospice causes fear in people, and fear causes suffering. And so, one of my goals as a chaplain is to help alleviate that suffering by exploring their fear and being present with them on their journey towards healing, not necessarily healing of the physical body, but healing of the spirit, of the heart, of the mind, of the soul, the emotions. There have been studies done with cancer patients to gauge their emotional responses to dying, and oftentimes there is much less fear in those who acknowledge they are dying. Because the more we push something away and don't think about it, the more anxiety producing it can be. And so to alleviate anxiety, we must embrace the reality of the moment, or what I say, embrace the suck. Sometimes you just have to embrace the suck. Take, for example, my friend Richard. He just turned 50, and he was diagnosed with cancer a few years ago, and the cancer went away after treatment. Unfortunately, it didn't stay away. And on April 12th, he found out that it is aggressive and scattered now, and so he is dying. In his words, "I'm being pretty positive, but it looks like I'm pretty much screwed on time." You might think that he is in the depths of despair, but actually, at this moment right now, he's at a music festival And he probably danced until the sun came up this morning, knowing him. I've never met anyone quite like him. He's so focused on enjoying the present moment. He told me that knowing that he is going to die feels kind of exciting, like how you feel when you're going on vacation, except he won't be coming back. Like all of us, he doesn't know with any certainty what happens after death, but the unknown is beautiful to him. The universe is a magical place, and he is grateful for his time on this earth. He is at peace with dying. This is what I want for all of my patients and their families. This is the ultimate goal of hospice, to facilitate a sense of peace and comfort, to help people not suffer. Each member of our hospice team contributes to the plan of care in their own specific way. As a chaplain, I specialize in listening and asking thoughtful questions to move folks forward towards this place of peace. We dig into the sources of distress that the patient might be feeling together. We do it together. So we address hopelessness, guilt, loss of identity, loss of faith community for folks that can't get to church anymore, family conflict, unfinished business, powerlessness, anger, fear, denial, all of these things. So as a chaplain, I dig into it with the patients and their families. We provide support in various ways through listening, prayer, that's a big one for a lot of folks, prayer, meditation, ritual, art, music, and even funeral planning. Chaplains are for people of all religious traditions and no religious tradition. I wish more people knew that, because I feel that folks think chaplains are just for Christians, and that is not true at all. Now, your chaplain might be Christian, but it's not about your chaplain. It's not about their beliefs. It is about your beliefs. I tend to think that the best chaplains are Unitarian Universalists because of our emphasis on honoring the worth and dignity of each person, and we embrace a diversity of beliefs, but I suppose I might be a little bit biased about that. Honestly, most of the chaplains that I have worked with are just fantastic, and regardless of their own beliefs, they show up for their patients and their families, and they do just as good of a job as us Unitarian Universalist chaplains. As a hospice chaplain, I get the honor of holding hands and journeying with those who are experiencing the sacred transition from this earthly realm to the next. And I get to not only be with the patients, but also the people who love them and care for them. God bless the caregivers. Caring for a loved one who is sick and dying can be exhausting and isolating and stressful. Hospice takes care of those who take care of those who are dying. Hospice provides not only emotional and spiritual support for the caregivers, but also a break when needed. We offer respite care for patients so they can come into the hospice house and the caregivers can have a little bit of time to themselves. I wish that I had known about hospice when my mother was sick. She should have been on hospice. She really should have been on hospice. Her physical, spiritual, and emotional pain and suffering needed to be alleviated, and the hospital didn't do this for her. Also, the pain and suffering of my father and my brothers and myself would have been eased during her illness and her dying and her death, and afterwards through the bereavement services that hospice provides. I wish I had asked, but I didn't know. I didn't really know. And from what I'm learning, a lot of people don't know about hospice. They truly just associate hospice with death, and they think that they can't ask about it. You can ask about it. Ask about hospice. Ask the physician. Ask them to explain what's going on in detail. Be an advocate or get someone to help you ask them about hospice. Now you know about it. I pray that we stop pretending that death is not a part of life. I pray that we honor the experience of dying as sacred and meaningful. I pray that we do not wait until we are dying to think about what we want our last days on this earth to look like. And I pray that we live as though it were our last day on earth, that we love as hard as we can, that we ask and we offer forgiveness, and we celebrate the simple blessing of waking up and taking a breath and being alive every single day. May it be so. And now, let us sing our closing hymn.